Hey everyone! Today we're diving into squat movement assessment and mechanics checklist. We'll cover common faults and mobility restrictions, how to address them for safer and more effective reps, and we'll discuss different squat variations and their benefits. Let's get started. Biomechanics of a squat. What is a squat? A squat is a fundamental movement pattern involving the simultaneous flexion of the ankles, knees, and hips, allowing your hips to descend down towards your calves. Imagine the motion of sitting down and standing up from a chair. This movement pattern is essential for daily activity and functional strength. Proper squat form reduces the risk of injury not only during the exercise, but also in daily activities. Incorrect movement patterns can lead to chronic wear and tear. For example, if your glutes don't activate and your knees collapse inward every time you sit and stand, the repeated stress on your knees can cause significant structural issue over time. This could be happening with or without you knowing or having any sort of symptoms of pain, and you don't even know what's happening. Performing and training natural movement patterns with external loads in the gym, like a squat, strengthens the muscles and joints involved, ensuring you remain strong and capable as you age. As we age, we naturally lose muscle mass and strength. Maintaining lower body strength is crucial for independence. For instance, if you lack the strength to stand up from a low chair, you might start using your arms to compensate, which further weakens your legs. Over time, if you lose the upper body strength as well, you might require assistance to perform simple tasks like standing up. Basic biomechanics. Just like a math problem, the more variables involved in an equation, generally the more complex it is. With movement, it's the same thing. The more joints that need to move in unison, the more complex and generally the more beneficial it is. When we squat, we need to go through ankle dorsiflexion, knee flexion, and hip flexion all at the same time. Because so many joints are moving, we activate more muscle, and with something like a bicep curl, we're not able to do that. We call exercises like this compound movements. Because of this, we burn more calories, build more strength, and take our joints through a longer range of motion. The main muscle groups that are working in squats are our quads, hamstrings, and glutes. Now, depending on the variation of the squat we perform, it changes our center of gravity, and the mechanics will slightly change, and the percentage distribution of stress applied to these different muscle groups are going to be different. For instance, if we perform a front-loaded squat, whether that's with a barbell or with free weights, like a kettlebell or a dumbbell, the load helps change the center of gravity, and it allows us to keep a more vertical torso angle, and we also go in more knee flexion. Because our quad's main job is knee extension, we then emphasize working our quads more and slightly less of our hamstrings and glutes. If we push our butt back further and go through less knee flexion, generally we'll work more of our hamstrings and glutes. This might be advantageous for people like powerlifters who are trying to lift more load, but I don't generally recommend this. Now, because we are also generally lifting more load in a movement like a squat, our core needs to engage to protect our spine. So squatting can be a wonderful way to functionally work your core without getting on the floor and doing crunches. Common form, issues, and corrections. Foot position and stability. Let's start from the ground up, focusing on the relationship between the ground and your feet. Your foot is the only contact point between you and the ground, so it's imperative to maximize the stability of your ankle-foot complex to prevent energy leaks. Proper stance. Everyone's hip anatomy is different, so there is no one-size-fits-all protocol for optimizing form. You can test your current hip anatomy and mobility by laying face up on the ground and pulling one leg into your chest into hip flexion. Notice where it's most comfortable and where you have the greatest range of motion. Is it with your leg abducted slightly out to the side? You can also perform this against a wall. A common optimal position is having your feet relatively straight. A 15-degree external rotation is also acceptable, but any further than this, and we start to lose the ability to create stability in our hips from the natural force generated by externally rotating our femur and activating our glute max. Speaking of external rotation, you will notice that when you corkscrew our feet into the ground, we create much more of a natural arch to the bottom of our foot. If you have flat feet, this is an extremely important cue to help give you a better base of support and activate your glutes to reduce valgus knee. Ankle mobility. The amount of dorsiflexion you can achieve is imperative to having a good squat. Contrary to popular belief and pseudoscience on the internet, having your knees travel over your toes is a natural and important occurrence in a squat. If you're squatting with a load, especially on your back, and your squat looks more like a hinge, your lower back will have increased tension, possibly overworking your erectors. You might also be shifting your weight to the front of your foot and lifting your heels, increasing the stress on the knees and leaking out energy in your squat. To check your ankle dorsiflexion, stand next to a wall. Place your hand widthwise between your toes and the wall, and while keeping your heel down, try to touch your knees to the wall. If you can do this equally on both sides, you've passed the test. If you still struggle to keep an upright torso, It's more of a proprioception and self-cueing problem rather than something structural. To work on this, try squatting facing a wall and see if you can stay as upright as possible without hitting it. If you failed this test, try a banded joint mobilization drill. Banded joint mobilization drill. Grab a resistance band and set up to something low on the floor. Step in with your foot, walk away until you have adequate tension, and elevate your foot 6 to 12 inches off the ground. Slowly press your knee over your toes while keeping your heel down and work through dorsiflexion while taking deep breaths. Perform a set of 15 reps with a 5-second hold. A quick fix for having lack of ankle dorsiflexion is also standing with your heels elevated on a weight plate or using lifting shoes. While both of these are great temporary options, don't settle for this Band-Aid fix. By addressing these common form issues from the ground up, you can improve your squat technique, prevent injuries, and enhance overall performance. Knee alignment. Relative to some of the more complex joints in the body, the knee is simple. It's a hinge joint. Much like a door, it flexes and extends at the knee, and most chronic knee issues stem from imbalances, asymmetries in your hip and ankle. To minimize shear force and optimize performance in your squat, ensure your knee is always tracking in the direction over your toes. Common fault, valgus knee. The most common fault seen in lower body knee flexion movements is valgus knee. This occurs when your glute abductors, glute minimus and medius, are overpowered by tight adductors on the inside of your leg, causing your femur to internally rotate and your knee to collapse inward. This creates a shear force on your knee, decreases stability in your hips, and even affects your foot and ankle by forcing eversion and collapsing your foot arch. Fixing valgus knee. To help fix valgus knee, we can do soft tissue work on our adductors. A large myofascial release ball or yoga block with a lacrosse ball works best. Start with a set of 1 minute, searching for tight, sensitive tissue, followed by glute activation work. Standing fire hydrant. Attach a light or medium mini band under your knee and place one foot against a wall about a foot high. With the other foot about 2 feet away from the wall, go into slight knee and hip flexion, and then with your back foot lightly against the wall, abduct your knee out as much as you possibly can, like a dog peeing on a fire hydrant, hence the name. Stabilize your bottom knee over your toes and prevent it from collapsing inward. Don't worry about your back foot being in constant contact with the wall. Only the toes should. Clamshell. If the standing fire hydrant is too challenging and you keep losing your balance, try clamshells from the ground. Lie on your side with your knees bent and feet together, keeping your feet touching. Lift your top knee as high as you can without possibly rotating your pelvis. Perform this exercise with a mini band around your knees for added resistance. Most working individuals suffer from something called glute amnesia, where the glutes get tired and matted down from prolonged sitting and essentially lose the ability to fire from lack of use. These exercises will strengthen your glutes and improve proprioception in the area, ultimately leading to more knee and ankle and hip alignment, reducing your risk of injury and improving performance. Hip symmetry. As far as the knee goes, it might be one of the simplest joints, but the hip, on the other hand, it's a lot more complex. It's a ball and socket joint, and it has the ability to go through flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, internal and external rotation. During a bilateral movement like a squat, we need perfect symmetry between both sides. Common issue, lateral hip shift. One example of an imbalance may be a lateral hip shift. As you descend into your squat, if you notice your hips shifting to one side, you may lack external rotation in one hip and lack the ability to stabilize and create strength in the other. Faber test. While laying on the ground face up, bend one knee and have the ankle sit right above your kneecap on the opposite leg. Let your hip then fall into external rotation. Look at the range of motion on both sides and compare. The side that generally has the weight shift will also have the side that has less external rotation. Fixing lateral hip shift. Use a kettlebell and let's do a lateral hip shift. In a kneeling position, abduct one hip out to the side with your knee angle open slightly more than 90 degrees. Shift your weight laterally to the side while holding a light weight. Ensure your knee tracks over your toes and doesn't collapse inward. Perform 15 reps per side with a 3-second hold at the end. Airplanes. Stand on one leg and hip hinge almost 90 degrees. From here, go through hip internal and external rotation, trying to close and open your hips as much as possible. Hold on to something for stability if needed. The hip is a complex joint. That's why imbalances that come from our asymmetrical movements on a daily basis are bound to affect us. That's why we need to implement a ton of single-legged movement patterns into our routine. Depth and range of motion. I love the phrase, if you don't use it, you lose it. When it comes to movement, if we don't continuously take our joints through long ranges of motion on a daily basis, the musculature around those joints gets slowly tighter, limiting our ability to function, and getting into these natural positions become harder. Even notice how a baby squats? It's perfect! Bad movement habits and the passage of time haven't had a chance to ruin their ability to get into a squat. Where I'm going with this is that the longer range of motion you can strength train in with perfect form, the more likely you are to maintain that range. Not only that, unlike stretching, you're strengthening tissue through all ranges of motion, making the joints more stable and resilient. So when we squat, we need to go as low as we can. But here's the caveat, always with good form. Common issue, butt wink. The most common mistake I see in individuals trying to get ass to grass low with a squat without proper mobility and stability in their hips is leading to what we call a butt wink. This is when you get to excessive posterior pelvic tilt at the bottom of your squat, and it leads to increased tension on your lumbar spine. The easiest fix for this is trying a different stance for your squat, possibly wider, or increasing your ankle dorsiflexion as we discussed earlier in this video with the banded ankle distraction stretch. Assisted sissy squat hold. With a thicker resistance band around your knees, step back as far as you can to create resistance that helps you maintain a vertical torso angle. Hold this position for 30 seconds before your next workout. So again, going low is important to maintain mobility and optimal strength in all tissue in that range of motion involved in the squat. But however, compromising a neutral spine for more range of motion is never a good thing. By addressing these depth and end range of motion issues, you can ensure a safer and more effective squat, improving your overall performance and joint health in the long run. Squat variations. Barbell back squat. This is the best of all variations for building general squat strength, but it's a little more complex and there's more risk reward. Barbell front squat. For building strength with more quad and core engagement and letting the weight sit on your shoulders versus having to actually hold it, so you can generally do more load than a goblet squat. Goblet squat. Dumbbell or kettlebell. This is the most basic of all squat variations, and it's going to work and get you to all your goals. You can perform this from almost anywhere, and you're just going to need to hold a dumbbell or kettlebell or almost any object just to your chest. Dual kettlebell front squat. This variation of a front squat allows you to hold a little bit more load to your chest because you're not going to exhaust your arms holding it there, and it's just a slightly more advanced variation of a goblet squat, but it's still going to work all the same tissue. Stagger stance squat. This variation of a squat is going to help you work in a little more of a unilateral fashion, meaning one leg is going to work a little more than the other. This is very different than the typical symmetrical variations of squats you do. This might help you work on any asymmetries, and it might just be a fun way for you to spice up your program. General tips and advice for improving your squat technique. Again, this is not going to be a one session of mobility or corrective exercise, and then we're performing the perfect variation of the squat. If we're immobile or we have asymmetries, it's going to take time to loosen up that tight tissue and for you to be able to activate the correct musculature to perform these squats correctly. We're going to start with the easiest variation of a squat that we can perform with perfect form. From there, we'll be able to increase load over time or try more challenging variations of a squat. Number 2, have some fun with this. Again, you're going to sit and stand for the rest of your life and you need to be good at it. And while that's a very daunting thing to have to think about, just have fun. Try variations of squats that you see on the internet that you think are different. Know why you're doing them though. Don't just perform movement patterns without knowing how it's going to get you closer to your goal and what tissue and why you're trying to activate these muscle groups. That concludes our assessment and technique analysis of how to squat. I hope this was helpful. Keep working as hard as you can and take your time. You're going to get to where you want to be very soon. Thanks for being here, guys. Love you and best of luck.